Hello, and welcome to this interesting and informative panel concerning one of the hottest topics in recent years in the external development community, mergers and acquisitions. My name is Carl Schmidt, and I'm the Senior Director of External Development at Zynga, and I'm honored to introduce this distinguished panel of industry veterans to talk about successful transition strategies post-acquisition of a studio. I have been personally involved in the process at Zynga, where we've made quite a few acquisitions in the past few years. Our approach to culture is to find companies with a strong culture and disrupt it as little as possible. In many ways, Zynga realizes that culture is a factor of the success of the company, which is why we are interested in them in the first place. All that said, our approach is not the only approach. And this panel is here to share with you what works for them from the standpoint of the acquiree and the acquired. So with all that said, on with the show.
Welcome to our panel discussion. We are convening today to discuss the challenges of keeping teams functioning comfortably, efficiently, and happily after the studio where they work is purchased and integrated into a new parent company. Let me introduce the panel. Jake DiGennaro, North America General Manager of Virtuous, has participated in the onboarding of teams in Europe, Asia, and North America, and in the creation of new studios. Kay Arutyunyan co-founded Counterpunch Studio, which Virtuous just acquired. Dan Prigg is the Vice President of Production at Aspire Media, which was purchased by Embracer Group in March. So both of their experiences with this process are very recent. Ashley Liu, co-founder of MindWalk, experienced the purchase of her company by Keywords, for which she is now Service Line Director, and has since been privy to the addition of numerous studios to the Keywords group. She has the benefit of seeing both sides of acquisitions. I'm Philip Dennison, Senior External Dev Producer, and with Ashley, a member of the XDS Advisory Committee. So a key component of this topic is that the integration of new teams can be comprehensive or limited. It can be fast or slow. The unification strategy could be either to carefully retain the new studio's autonomy or quickly rip off the Band-Aid and integrate the new studio to feel like part of the larger whole. I want to get to, can you do both, and what works, whether anything works to prevent it. But Ashley, I would like to pose to you, when you're considering a unification strategy, what's easy and what's hard?
I'm not sure if there's anything that's actually easy, but a lot of things are hard. But if I were to put it on a scale, I think things like the operations such as finance, HR, IT, in general are easier compared to the integration of culture, the integration of workflow processes, production processes, the integration of the way which the different studios work. So we try always get the operations done right first, and then slowly, if needed, sometimes we leave the studios as they are, integrate the soft stuff, shall I say.
In your experience, are there times when the quick mandate works better than the slow transition?
I mean, everything is great, but I would like to answer that question as no. I think each studio is unique. The time and the part of keywords that they fit is going to be unique. So I'm a proponent of understanding the targets as they come in and trying to preserve as much as we can, because we're a service provider. And as a service provider, when you're buying, the most important thing are people. And when it comes to people, you just have to be mindful and careful how you're integrating because you're changing their homes.
So in past XDS discussions, we've heard from founders who have been purchased, and in some cases they're a little rueful after that decision. Do any of you have an experience of that sort of being felt in the teams themselves, outside of the founders?
I mean, I would say that, depending on, I've been in smaller organizations that have been acquired. Usually the founders, when they started those studios, do it with a high degree of independence, a high degree of entrepreneurship. And, you may find that after that acquisition, you kind of lose that sense, at least from the founders do, because, the things that they really truly do love was that independence and entrepreneurship. That goes away sometimes depending on the acquisition. That DNA percolates downwards. So they hire people of that like mind and like kind of entrepreneurship, because that's who they kind of recognize. And so all of a sudden the entire company is like, wait, where's our independence? Where's our entrepreneurial spirit now that we're a part of, the Borg, sometimes as they're referred to. So I've definitely seen that. That transition plan is very, very important. The founders, I think, usually they think they know what they're getting into, but at the end of the day, until you're living every day trying to explain it to the rest of your company, trying to convince them that this is still a good deal, convince them that this is the right way, convince them that change is good, even if they may not believe it. I think that's kind of what you see sometimes.
Jake, as someone who's experienced in acquisition, what counsel do you offer to the owners to smooth the transition?
I mean, there's a lot of conversations that we have from the very first time that we have a conversation about, is there a partnership that could exist between our relative organizations, all the way through due diligence and cultural identity and the actual integration of a team. I think that, to Ashley's point, there's a lot of effort that goes into preserving the identity of that team that gets acquired by a larger company. Ultimately, you don't want to fundamentally change who they are and what they do and how they do it. Rather, you want to give them additional firepower, give them additional tools for their belt that will make some aspects of running the operation more streamlined or more efficient, while at the same time giving them potential runway or access to a wider degree of opportunities and access that allows them to kind of level up to a degree, or to try something that's a little bit more ambitious or a little bit more risky. So it's a matter of having very straightforward, honest, and fairly intimate conversations with those founders that have really raised something, right? Starting with something that was in and of itself, when it was started, a huge risk. It takes a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety to build and sustain a company over 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and making sure that as the acquiring company, you treat that with the respect that it deserves and the history that it deserves. And to make sure that the owners and founders of that organization don't feel like they're just going to become another set of numbers on some spreadsheet somewhere.
So to dig into that a little bit, can you think of, from your experience, any lessons you've learned and applied? Anything you learned on an early acquisition that you were able to improve on for future acquisitions?
So I've been part of 2 acquisitions and 3 studios being founded since I've been here with Virtuous. And one thing that we've continued to learn and refine is how much distance we keep ourselves at, especially during those first 3 and 6 and 9 and 12 months, to offer to support. I mean, there are certain things like IT, like finance and things like that, that need to be integrated for a variety of different reasons. But beyond that, certain things in terms of production management, pipeline and workflow, tool selection and everything along those lines, like there doesn't need to be a centralized push upon them to adopt everything. There are some things that you hope that will get adopted just because it streamlines cooperation with other members and other groups inside of the organization, but ensuring that we don't get too ham-fisted about it. Obviously, part of the reason that they were acquired is because it works, because the business is working, because the stuff that they're producing is impressive, and you want to roll that into your group. So why force change when there doesn't need to be change forced upon them? So I think distance is something that we try to learn as best as we can. Additionally, is gaining from them some of their expertise. So definitely something that we experienced with Counterpunch, which was the most recent acquisition, is saying, listen, there are things that we can do for you as a larger organization, but there's a lot of stuff that you can do for us. There's a lot of things that Kay and her group are tremendously talented at, and some trainings and technology and tools and things along those lines that they can bring to the rest of the group. So making sure that that's a bi-directional exchange of information and expertise and knowledge, I think is something we've definitely learned over those different acquisitions and new studio foundings, is to take as much as we're giving in terms of knowledge and skill.
Kay, since you went through the process recently, I was going to ask, were there questions you wish you had asked, but I'd like to have it for somebody who's going to be in your position as the manager of an acquired studio on how to prepare the team for the shift.
Our experience, I feel, was a little bit unique because for us, it was the obvious choice to join Virtuous. My co-founding partner, Andrew, and I had spent almost a decade building and maintaining Counterpunch. And when you are in a silo with someone like that in a small company, you find soon that you've shared all the ideas and you start to think alike. So the introduction of Virtuous into the mix basically was actually quite positive for both myself and my group. It brought the stability, it brought the additional a broader sense of growth and ideas that we had kind of come up to a wall on, and questions. We were our acquisition process was quite thorough, so I can say it was quite filled with questions on both parts, almost too thorough. However, I think questions that I wish that I had asked were more involved with getting our team to ask questions, because I feel like I asked all the questions, and I feel like I enrolled my team in this idea of the acquisition, and they were very, very excited. And now that we're here, I wish that I could have gone back and gotten more of their questions about what's next, so that now as I'm, navigating the waters of, okay, we're here, we're coming up on a year, things have been great. What's in year 2 and 3 and 4, and making sure that my team's goals are still integrated in the goals we now have as Counterpunch, a Virtuous studio. Because previously, we've had artists that have been with us the whole 10 years. So our goals were always intertwined. And I think we need to be very careful now to retain that team and continue to make sure that what they want is entangled in the next plan for Virtuous.
Dan and Ashley, that it looks like it resonated for you a little bit. Do you, either of you, have something you can add?
I do. I think as we go, obviously Keywords does a lot of acquisitions, and having been on the other side, it allowed me to be able to anticipate more. And even so, I don't think we do enough. I think as acquirers, we don't do enough at giving the companies a view of what the future may or may not look like, and painting the entire picture. And I think, and that's something that I've been trying to do, whereby I will often have this statement when I speak to them is, I'm going to take off my keyword hat now. I'm gonna speak to you as a friend, as somebody who's been on the other side, and have that very honest discussion of, these are the downfalls, and there are going to be, let's all be honest, right? These are going to be the shortcomings of joining a larger group. Like Jake said, I mean, for MindWalk, for me, it was 12 years of risk, blood, sweat, tears, however you want to put into it. This is what I built. You know, I mean, if it could continue, and this would have been my lifelong mission or craft or whatever it is, and to give your baby to somebody else, it's a very hard decision. And I think sometimes on the other side, I don't know if, I mean, when you're talking to these founders, you gotta take off your keyword hat or your virtuous hat or whoever it is, and speak from that perspective. And I think if we do more of that, the two sides will understand each other more, and during integration, it might be an easier journey.
Dan, I imagine one of the big anxieties from a manager of an acquired studios is the risk that the team perceives a change, that they're not as happy, and you begin to lose talent. And I would like to know whether that makes you nervous, or also outside of that, what makes a recently acquired studio manager nervous relative to your effectiveness as a service provider?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of nervousness there across the board, pretty much on a daily basis. I think, I think we kind of touched upon it. Is that, at least what we do at Aspire is we have a high degree of transparency. Now, that transparency, I think, means different things for different people at different levels. But I think if you try to provide as much as possible, it's the surprises that make people anxious, right? It's the surprises of, it didn't matter if it was good or bad. It's just that when you're surprised as an individual worker, you no longer trust the entity you're a part of. And then that trust opens up the door of like, well, I can go anywhere. Like I can go, build that trust somewhere else. And so, even before you're acquired, we started kind of hinting the company, hey, just so you know, we're talking to several, banking solutions or, acquisition solutions or, debt solutions, as part of this process. And so we kind of kept sharing that as a leadership group. And then when it did happen, we also had to kind of share, why Embracer made sense, for the company for the future, as well as like what we don't know. And I think that kind of transparency also helps them kind of recognize, that shared fear is also shared responsibility. It helps kind of ease. It's not the individual, being scared about losing your job, because that used to be the old adage of like, you buy a company, I don't need HR, I don't need accounting, I don't need legal services, I just need, DevOps. And instantly, I guarantee you, everyone that I talk to after the acquisition, the question is always, well, what's going to happen to me? Right? And so the first thing you want to do is really reassure them the reason of the acquisition is because of you. Right. And if you can flip that, I think that helps. As a manager, retention is always an issue, 365, right? It's a competitive market in a fantastic industry. So, it doesn't matter if we're acquired or not. I'm always worried about losing great people. But I think, what I tell, my people is that my job as a manager is to train them for the next role. The company's responsibility is to retain them. So we really focus on just providing a great environment for that. And, you're still going to lose people, but you still need to invest in people, and you still want to, do, I think, everything you legitimately can to create an environment that people want to come to work for. So, I think with that acquisition stuff, I don't think we lost anyone actually during that period, but we did answer a lot of questions.
For any of you, is part of your strategy to communicate the team's stake in the success of the larger venture?
In what
Sort
capacity?
of an esprit de corps, a studio that you purchase an artist at Counterpunch, for example. Is there a strategy and an effort to make them feel their stake in Virtuous?
Yeah,
I hope
can
so.
take that one. I can
See how they answer.
My take on all of this has always been clear visibility. We approached our core team when the talks began about any possible acquisition. We kept them updated the entire time, and we have been speaking to them at least once a week ever since, more so than before, just so that everyone understands how imperative it is to maintain the team that provides the service that was, that was required or that was attractive to Virtuous. So our core team has been 100% retained. We anticipate retaining them for the next foreseeable future. And then after the acquisition, we are experiencing a really rapid growth. So then there's additional communication that goes into both maintaining the general happiness and comfort of the original team, and also making it comfortable for a new team coming in, because we have veterans with, like I said, 5-10 years of experience, and that could be a little bit intimidating for the new hires to come into a team like that, to ramp up to the level of quality and turnaround that we're doing quite quickly. So there has been vast amounts of increased communication all around to ensure that our team is happy. And also there were concessions that were made both for me and Andrew in the process of the acquisition, so that it wasn't just for our benefit, it was for everyone's benefit, and it was very clear to them that this was a positive way forward.
Jake, I was going to return to one of our earliest topics because I was interested in hearing your take on it. But the way you approach the velocity of integration.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have any thoughts on that? On best practices for the slow integration, or things you've learned about that?
I think it's different for every scenario. Some teams that have joined the fold have integrated rather quickly, partially because either the way that they were operating and functioning was closer to how we are currently operating, other ones further away. So it was more of a, whether it was an IT or a finance or an operational lift, required some, we have training and onboarding just like we would for any group or any new hire that joins the organization. So there is some education on how we operate and just kind of see how much crossover there is in that Venn diagram. So those things can take, low end 2-3 months, high end 5-6 months. And there's always little random things, as Kay can attest to, one-off things that still haven't been integrated yet, that as we discover them, we go, oh, we missed that. So, there's some stuff that you can do fairly quickly. Now, when it comes to, and I think Ashley made a really good point with this earlier, is in terms of cultural identity and integration. We have a fairly firm position that each Virtuous studio has its own individual identity, and then together we are Virtuous, and so we have some cultural identity stuff. So it's more a matter of exposing the new team, the new group, to the other groups in the network, and that can take time, so that they can become familiar with and understand who they are and how they operate and what's unique about that specific group. So that can take quite some time. And then also, again, not ramming, not planting the Virtuous flag down in Southern California and then saying, you're us now. Making sure that there's an option for them to buy in as much or as little as Kay and her group decide to. Because ultimately, it is very tight-knit group of people that are joining a much larger organization. And so making sure that the pacing is unique to each instance instead of applying some sort of templatized, on month 1 you do this, and on month 2 you do this, and by month 5 we're totally locked in. Like, it's not really quite the way that we do it around here. So I think catering to the unique circumstances is always the best route, and having those conversations throughout the course of exploring what it will be like for the new team to be part of the large organization and say, okay, based on what we see here, it's going to take us X number of months to do this and Y number of months to do that. And you guys are very unique in this respect, so let's keep that the way it is. And you could use some help over here, so let's try to prioritize that aspect of the integration process.
Also, allow me to chime in. I think some of that, what Jake is talking about, also depends on the founders that you're acquiring, because the founders dictate the culture and so forth, and the reasons why they acquire are going to be different. It's going to be vastly different from one studio to another, one company to another. There's some founders that will want to be tightly integrated because of certain reasons, because they want to learn, they want to do more and so forth, and they see being part of a larger group allow them to do that. There's going to be certain founders that don't. There are going to be certain founders that basically say, you know what, just give me the infrastructural support and just allow me to do whatever I've been doing and let me grow as fast as I can. So I think that also plays into how you approach as well.
Are there any topics that you think that we should jump into, or any additional risks or opportunities that you've thought of from a conversation so far?
I'd just say that regardless of circumstance or what side of the fence you are, or whether it's an investment or an acquisition or a merger or whatever, that anyone that's considering going down that path from either side of the fence focuses on having honest and transparent conversations about what it will look like, how it will function, to not misrepresent either what either party is or what either party will be like after the fact, because ultimately there's going to be a reckoning if there's a little bit of smoke and mirrors. So having honest, upfront conversations and developing a legitimate personal rapport between the parties, I think, is an incredibly important aspect of it for the success, both short-term and long-term, of any sort of partnership of this nature. So honesty and transparency, just go in wide open. That's my one tip that I would say.
You make it sound so easy, Jake.
Oh.
Yeah, right.
Well, I would add, I would add a little bit to that, having just gone through it myself. Speaking to anyone else who's gone down this path, being acquired and having negative experiences, more often than not, the issue is that the proper support isn't hired or contained within the company to do the vetting and the transaction portion in a really thorough manner. So a lot of what Jake's saying, a lot of the information is lost in the transaction, and then you're just surprised at the other end with either not what you were expecting or less than what you were expecting. For us, something that was very, very supportive and something I would always suggest to anyone going down that path is to have the appropriate support. So whether that's an attorney, that's an accountant, like to have a real team of people behind you to be able to do it correctly, so that you don't wind up on the other side with regret, because then that's not a win for either team.
Good observation. Well, I believe that wraps up the panel discussion. Going once, going twice. So let's take some time for questions. Thanks.
This is a live Q&A. These people are real and they are awake. So please start filling out some questions for us, and I think we'll get started. We have one question. When and this one, I believe, is directed to Aspire. So when Aspire was acquired, was there something you wish you had done differently? And I'll put that to Dan.
Yeah. It's always tough to say what you would do differently. Honestly, no. I don't think there is anything you can do differently. Or in hindsight, I think there's things that you learn, but you don't know that ahead of any kind of acquisition. I think what we learned was just, we needed to communicate more and not, hey, when are they going to talk to us, or when are they going to tell us what to do, or any of this other stuff. It was mostly like they were waiting for us to do the same thing. So for us, it's just that learning process of getting to know someone who you're now part of a larger organization.
So it's a lot about communication and working that out maybe before everyone's kind of wondering what's going on. Hey, are they going to talk to us, or are they going to talk to us? Probably making those connections and getting that settled ahead of time.
But it was, you can't do, like, there's only so much you can do before the deal's actually done. There's only so much more you can do, actually invest of your time and your people's and your resources. And so there's a part of you that kind of holds back a lot of that in kind of emotional investment, because you're like, what if they don't like us, or what if they say no, or what if they decide not to? And then once it's done, it's just a flood of like, oh my God, there's so much I want to ask you now. So.
And Ashley, what's your approach to that communication issue?
I think fairly much this. I mean, I think the question is, would communication in terms of what I would have done differently as MindLock? How
yes.
I should
yes, and because you're on the other side too, you could probably answer from the acquiree and the acquirer.
So I think back to the MindLock days. I think I did very much what Dan did, try to keep everybody as informed as I can, but the floodgates opened when the deal was signed. And that's when you go out and you're trying to find as much information as you can to assure, to know how to put the path forward, so that integration becomes smooth. And if I would look back, if there's things I would have done differently, I think there would have been. I've always wanted. I think I've said this on some different panels. I think as an acquirer, we should always have what's called an acquisition in a box, right? So, and that kind of follows the process where in the beginning, when LOI is signed, this is what you need to talk about. And then after acquisition, here is all the list of stuff, because I think you forget, and it would be good to have everything kind of just check marked. And this is what we're trying to do at Keywords as well, to have what's called acquisition in a box. And I wish I had that when I was being acquired. And we try to do that as we're acquiring companies right now.
Yeah, I can jump in and say Zynga has a fairly robust in-a-box sort of a tracking solution, and everybody's involved. I'm in those meetings all day long. But this isn't about me. So I have a question for maybe Jake. What are some common poison pills that might exist in acquisition deals?
Common poison pills from the acquiree side as the acquirer?
I think from your perspective of being the acquirer, like what would be a poison pill in, what would kill a deal?
I think and I touched on it earlier, is the misrepresentation. Oftentimes, we have had conversations in the past with folks that at a surface level was really interesting and it made a lot of sense from a partnership perspective. And as we started to kind of peel back the layers of the onion, it was, well, this strength isn't really as strong as you represented it, and you haven't actually done this aspect of this thing that you said you did. I mean, you kind of did it, but you didn't really do as much as you said you did. So when you enter into those conversations and those fallacies start to emerge, it erodes trust really fast. And when you're talking about something that's supposed to be a long-term, mutually beneficial, 1 + 1 = 3 type of a scenario, you don't have the trust, then you might as well just pull out right then and there. So I think if there was one thing, I would pin it on that. And obviously that applies to everything from what the skill sets are, what do the books look like, what does the roadmap of the company look like, what does the reputation of the company look like? Because it's not just a matter of talking to the primary stakeholders of a potential partner company. It's talking to their staff, it's talking to their leads, their juniors, it's talking to partners that they worked with before. And so all of it's going to come out in the wash one way or another. So you're better off just kind of putting in cards from both sides of the table out in the open early on, and then figuring out, like, knowing what we know, does it make sense to spend the time and energy to go further?
Great. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Poison pill?
Culture.
No.
Culture.
Beth?
I think that's going to, yes, peeling back the onions and realizing you're not getting an onion is an important part. But I also think that even if all the parts fit, if you don't have the personality, if you don't have the culture to fit, I think that's still a poison pill in the deal. So because ultimately you might be great at working separately, but you need to work great together. And if you can't find that, then it's probably not a deal that we should go for.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's honestly about ambition too, is the other thing that I kind of left out is, there are different motivations, for acquisition scenarios. Sometimes somebody wants to, they've ready to close that chapter of their life and move on to something else. They want to make sure that the thing that they've helped build is well taken care of in the next chapter of its existence. Like, that's okay. But if that's what it is, then just say that's what it is, right? Instead of saying, like, oh, I'm going to be here for the next 5 years, I'm going to do all this crazy stuff, and then 3 months afterwards they're like, all right, well, I bought a boat and see you later. So yeah,
I bought a boat. Cool. So this question is, does anyone have any insights to share on integration of studios from other parts of the world, which comes with many challenges from languages to cultural differences, etc.? Ashley might have some thoughts.
So I think the geographical component of any integration is, I think it needs to be considered. I'm trying to find an intelligent response to that. The answer is obviously yes, right? Because acquiring a company in China versus acquiring a company in London is very, very different. It also goes back to the motivation probably of the individuals who started these companies. In motivation of people who work there are very different. Talent pool around these studios are very different. So I think all of those need to be taken into consideration when we're doing the integration. And when we trying to build the infrastructure that integrate these studios, sometimes we have to give, and sometimes we have to say, well, these are corporate policies that you have to follow, just because it might be a little more difficult because you're in Eastern Europe. You just have to follow it. But knowing where to draw the line, where you're forcing the studio to follow your corporate rules, and knowing when to let go and say, I understand the benefit of allowing that studio to adhere to their cultural norms, that balance needs to be really understood by the acquirer. Because I think if you don't, then some of the assets that you are acquiring will be lost. And that cultural sensitivity of the acquirer, I don't think we're doing enough of that, and that's something that I wish we did more. Does that answer your question, Colin?
I think so, and there's other components to that. It's not just when it's a different region. So, when you're acquiring from China as opposed to Spain, as opposed to London or anywhere around the world, there's different regulations and all sorts of things which may or may not be appealing to the acquirer or the acquiree, from those perspectives.
Yeah.
Let's see. I had a question, actually. I'm going to go off, not on the question and answer thing, but Ashley actually mentioned something about the founders and treating different things differently. Do the founders of the company that's the acquiree want to change, or are they willing to change or not? and this could be for Dan or Kay as well. Maybe they have some insight into this as well. What happens when those founders leave, or is that part of the deal that they stay on for a certain amount of time? Does the culture then shift dramatically from what it was from the acquiree? Does that make any sense? A little bit of that is for my own questioning, because I've run into different scenarios like this.
You want to go first, Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I've been at companies where, you knew the founders were on a timer, and call them golden handcuffs, call them whatever you want, but regardless of the fact, if they are planning to leave, that does affect the culture, right? Because that is your leadership. That is literally like, what's the equivalent of feeling like the child and your parents have just handed you off to some foster parents, right? So you feel like your leadership is leaving you. They left you for a bunch of money, and now you don't know what's going to happen to your the company. And again, it always comes down to the individual. That does happen. Some founders are on the kind of the other spectrum of they really recognize what they're good at and they need help getting to the next level as a company, whether it's funding, whether it's support services, whether it's just accelerated growth, right? Or they just recognize, someone's might be good getting up to $10 million in revenue, but they recognize they're not good to get $100 million revenue. They need to bring in a CEO. Those are all kind of possible scenarios, but it's, I think it's if the founders are going to leave, they're going to leave, right? And the question then becomes, what's the culture that they've left behind? If that's kind of one of those cultures where it always funnels up to them, I think that's going to be problematic, because you're going to be you've basically have created a vacuum as a leadership group. Now, if you've created a group of individuals who are independent leaders in a culture that is supportive, and from my point of view, that's probably your job. I think then that company can continue to survive and grow. But it's just my opinion. Kay, what do you think?
I feel the same as you in the second part of that. I feel that for as long as I fit this role as the leader, I'm the best fit for this role as a leader, then I'll stay on. If at any point that I feel that this is beyond me, or I need to call in support, or hand over the reins, then I don't have an attachment to that. But I do agree that you can't just hand over the reins and then leave the group, because then you are going to leave, in essence, children in foster care. That's a good comparison. I like that. So that shouldn't be the plan when you have a company, especially one that is really dependent on the founder. I think that the founder is necessary to stay on for as long as it takes for them to no longer be the best fit for the leader or for long term. It's really needs to be about the growth and the benefit of the company. And I think there needs to be a lot of consideration for the team, because once the team starts to feel that they've been left behind, or that they've been abandoned, then the whole operation is going to suffer.
Great. So there's a question about, when courting a new acquisition target, are there any common threads for studios that want to stay independent? So again, I could probably toss that to Dan and Kay first, and then maybe actually get from the other side from Ashley and Jake, or just talk amongst yourselves. It's all okay.
So can you frame the question again?
So it's basically, when you're looking at a new acquisition target, are there common threads for studios that want to stay independent, like still keep that distance somewhat, but be acquired, but still keep that distance? I think be independent.
I'd say emphasizing the strength of your culture, the strength of the company and the culture as it is, during the course of conversations, I think is a big part of that, is to establish the fact that, the company is not limping along, and that without the external funding, they could continue in the way that they're doing stuff, and that they will be okay without meddling, I think is a big part of it. I mean, different companies go through different phases, right? So sometimes you might have an external source of funding for a partnership that comes in to help prevent a studio from closing, right? So they need help. They need outside support and counseling or whatever be it. But if you're not one of those and you've got a good business and you're running things fine, then make sure that you're upfront with that and emphasize it. Because everyone around you will be more inclined to say, well, let's not fix what's not broken, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would chime in to say, especially for teams that are smaller, it's important for the team and the morale not to feel like you've just been gobbled up by something bigger and now you don't exist. So it's important to maintain the special part of individuality. However, it's also important to feel like now you're a part of a bigger team. So feeling like you're a part of the mothership versus feeling like you're an outcast or feeling like you've just been taken in and you don't exist anymore. For Counterpunch, we kept our name. We're Counterpunch, a virtuous studio. And I think that was really special for our team because that was the first question everyone asked us, like, are we not Counterpunch anymore? So that was a big part of it, and just maintaining that name and calling ourselves Counterpunch, a virtuous studio, and that's how all of our studios are, was pretty special for the team, and I think it really made them feel comfortable with the initial jump.
Though I do think counter virtuous has a pretty nice ring to it.
Yes.
I mean,
virtuous punch.
Yeah,
virtuous punch, right?
Better.
That's even better. I think we ran into the opposite problem because, we were not looking to be acquired, so we were just looking at bank funding. We had no desire to give up control. And that's always what you're worried about as an independent studio is control. I think, Jake made a good point is that it's just expectations, right? As long as you're super clear about who you are and what your expectations are of what you're looking for, and that's the acquiree or the acquirer is also super clear about what their expectations. We actually ran into the opposite of like once Embracer kind of acquired us, they were completely hands off to a point where like we thought, did you forget about us? Because we're just because they go off and they're like, you want to be independent, great, we'll help you if you want help. If you don't, great, And so to the point where we had to kind of recalibrate of like, oh, if we want help, we actually have to ask for help. So, that was like, again, a lesson that we learned specifically with the Embracer Group.
So,
and Carl, sorry.
No,
Carl.
go ahead.
I was just gonna, I think the question was the common thread of where the studio or where the acquiree wants to be independent. I just want to offer 3 points that I've seen. One is I think the founders are very proud of what they built. I think that's very, very obvious. The second, they're proud of what they built, but I think in terms of the next layer or even the layers before that, there's a very strong family culture that also propels them to be independent. I think the third point is they are able to really just operate on their own, and they want to operate on their own. They're almost want to push away outside of intervention, so to speak. So if I look at studios where we've acquired where they want to remain independent versus studios where they welcome the bigger platform, they welcome the bigger support, I think the studios that want to remain independent kind of veer towards those 3 characteristics that I've talked about.
Yeah, I was curious because Dan said something in his comment. They weren't looking to be acquired. So how did that happen for you? And how does that happen for everyone? Really, it's kind of like if you are on the acquiree side, how did you get acquired? Like, did they come to you? Did the acquirer come to you, or was it vice versa? I'm curious about that too. But for Dan, like, how did this happen? And then I'd love to go kind of through and see if how are you guys acquiring people? How are you identifying those people? Is it the culture specifically, or are you approached by them and you go, hey, that's not a bad idea, So Dan, could you?
Yeah, I mean, the 2 founders, Ted and Michael, one of our core values is relationships, right? And they've known Lars from Koch Media for 20 years. Always, kept touch, with a lot of the Embracer groups. And, I think, what happened was through the various kind of, banking institutions that they were kind of talking about, like, how do we get debt and, what does that look like for the company to kind of fast accelerate, then the Embracer said, hey, let's have a conversation. And they were very upfront and said, we would be interested. What are you looking for first? So that was a very, very important question to open with. It wasn't this is what we'll do for you for this cost. It was, what are you looking for? Right. And that opened a conversation that, quickly accelerated into, well, tell us, Embracer, what are your values? What are your plans? And, because that was the foundation. Like, if our values did not match up, thank you very much. Have a nice day. We'll keep talking to, blood-sucking bankers. That's what our plan was. And then, it was just like a lot of great conversations, a lot of like, look, we're on the same page here. We're on the same page here. We're on the same page here. This does make sense, and so I would say that, probably it happened fairly quickly, post holidays, it amazed me the speed of once those decisions were made, there was no kind of like hesitancy, and that also made us feel good, right? You want to feel like you still are the first option. You're not kind of, let's wait and see how, maybe see these other studios that we think are a little bit, they might have more hair, so we might want to go with them, that kind of stuff. It's happened to me before, trust me. The stuff like that. So, all of those factors really just kind of played into kind of, we weren't looking, and, that conversation quickly accelerated into where we are at now.
So it is a lot to do with culture and values from the onset. And if it's not a match there, you should probably just let it lie and move on. So
100%.
Yeah, I'd love to hear from Ashley and Jake on this. And Kay, if you want to throw your 2 cents in, but Jake, you want to go?
Ashley, why do you want to take a first crack at it?
I think we were in the same boat. When keywords approached MindWalk, we weren't looking to be acquired. For keywords and for what we're doing now, obviously we have an acquisition strategy, and it's pretty simple. I mean, what you do is trying to fill out your portfolio in terms of services, so you know what you're missing in terms of in your portfolio, and then you try to fill out your geographical holes. And for keywords, MindWalk was easy because they didn't have anything in China. So Carl, to answer your question, how we were approached is because keywords needed to land in China, and MindWalk was a choice. And the network, I mean, this network is very tight. We all know each other very well, and if you put the right criteria forward, you kind of narrow down the list quite quickly. And that's what we're doing now in terms of the acquisition strategy as well. Is we know where we have portfolio holes that we need to fill, where we need to go, and again, the network is very small. All the service providers know each other. All our clients know each other, and it's like, hey, anybody who you might think would fit these criteria, and off we go. And sometimes we approach them, and sometimes we get approached.
Right.
Jake, back to you.
Sure. So, where does it start? It can be a lot of different places. For us, we're very intentional with the companies that we decide to partner with long term. They've been born out of, hey, we want you to do some stuff for us, and then we find out that working together is really great, and we go, we should keep doing this, right? And then suddenly we're talking about acquiring them. We've had conversations like with Counterpunch. That started off with, we have a certain specialty, it's Sparks, and Counterpunch has a certain specialty down in LA. And it was hey, if we paired together, what would that look like? And it was completely exploratory. And this was, almost 2 years ago? Before we even talked about anything to do with acquisition or money or anything like that, it was like, hey, how
before
cool would
COVID.
it be? Yeah, like way pre-COVID. And there was a bit of chemistry between the groups, and between what we're trying to do and what we're trying to do, and where can we bolster each other's future in that area. And then the third one is that when we have kind of a build it initially concept internally, but sometimes we need an accelerant. in some way, right? Whether it's because we're having trouble getting the right thing harnessed, or we have one group that really wants to do something, but they missing a certain piece, but by adding that piece, it accelerates them really, really fast. So in those cases, we might look for, hey, who does this specific thing really well, that by adding them into the group, suddenly the whole group is performing to a higher degree or a higher capacity. But generally speaking, it always starts with, if we did something together, how cool could that thing be, right? And then figuring out, okay, that seems like it could be fun. There's chemistry in terms of creating cool things together. Now, does it make sense for us to do this? Or is it just a matter of, let's just do stuff together and remain independent?
Great. So we're coming down to the last few minutes. I actually wanted to toss a question out to Phil, because we've been a little silent with Phil. Phil, in doing this talk, what's the most interesting aspect of what you've learned, or what you thought you'd get out of this talk? Just curious, in respect to culture and how, acquirers and inquiries have handled it.
I think it's the wide ramp of options, and the weighty set of considerations that have to be taken into account by both sides. I'm always interested in how the sort of rank and file of the teams are going to react to things, and the points that were made about transparency and very high degrees of communication. In the absence of information, people will invent often the worst possible scenario in their mind, and so the fact that this is sort of taken into account in mature versions of this exercise is good to know. But it's also sort of an object lesson for people who are trying to wade into it.
Great. And now we're down to less than 3 minutes. So if anyone has any final thoughts or advice about culture and how company acquisitions affect that, and vice versa, I'd say have at it. We can go across the board. Ashley?
I'm trying to think in terms of, as an acquirer, the culture that you establish yourself. And I think that's going to be important. And I think sometimes because we don't grow, Keywords didn't grow up by organically, right? So we grew up through acquisitions. And sometimes when you are, when you acquire these companies, those cultures gets introduced, and sometimes it's hard to go through all of that, and how you as an acquirer trying to pull all of it together, allowing the acquirer to retain, yet to have a firm grasp of where you're going as a bigger entity. I think that's probably something that I think we should spend more time on thinking about, because I think it's different than just growing up organically, and the challenges are different. And that contrast, I would love to have another talk with, I guess, this panel, just to understand what that difference is, and how do we mitigate it, some of the blockers.
Great. Actually, I think, oh yeah, go ahead, Kay. We got less than a minute.
Quick add. I think any major growth needs change. So I think it's less about maintaining the culture and growing a new, really great culture, taking the best of both cultures.
The mixing pot.
Agreed.
Yeah, I'd say if you're looking to get acquired, find somebody that does something that you do as good as you or better, and then figure out how you can partner with them to level yourself up. And as an acquirer, is find people that are going to make you better by being a part of your group and strengthen everybody. Again, it's generic saying, but 1 + 1 should always equal 3 in these scenarios. Otherwise, it's a failed venture.
Great. All right. And with that, I think we'll wrap it up. And I'd like to thank you all for being on this panel and answering these questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Phil, for putting it together.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you, Phil.